Hello, welcome to today's Cannabis Business Experts podcast. I'm Vijay Bachus from Bachus Business Consulting, and we have Ashley Grace from Morrison Alley Consulting. Today, we want to talk about a very pertinent topic in today's marketplace, and it's affecting everybody right now, and that is the coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19, it's also known as, and its impact really directly on the cannabis and hemp industry. I'd like to start today with kind of an overall view and then dive into the specifics of it. So actually, what are your thoughts kind of on what's going to be immediately impacted by the coronavirus in the hemp and cannabis industries?
Well, I think given, the way that this situation has played out, the Wuhan China coronavirus, right, is going to lead, first of all, to some more distrust in the Chinese CBD products that have been gaining popularity over the last few business quarters, unbeknownst really to consumers. But that's really what's been powering some of the price decline in the market. And I think that, first of all, we're going to see that the cheaper CBD isolate that's coming from China will decline in popularity. And therefore, it's going to be a good thing, I think, this year for an increase in demand for U.S. grown CBD. The manufacturers that are growing and the growers are both poised, I think, to have a better year in that regard, which is good. And then it's also going to, I think, increase demand for traceability and certification sources in terms of manufacturing. I don't know, Vijay, in terms of your expertise, I don't know if you'd like to comment on those items as well.
I think that's a great point, actually. I think this is really going to demonstrate the real need for a blockchain traceability of hemp sources and really being able to prove that your hemp was vetted through U.S. Department of Agriculture approved program, that it is certified hemp. You have the test results, you have the sealing, so you know exactly what you're getting. Part of this outbreak, I believe, in my opinion, was started due to a lack of good CGMP regulations in China to begin with, which may have helped accelerate the spread of the disease, so on and so forth. And I think that as you can really dig into those regulations, provide a really clear, transparent image of where your hemp came from, that the consumer is going to feel a lot more assurance and know that they can trust what your product is. And I also wanted to talk 1 minute really briefly before we continue on this topic, actually, about the coalition we're going to be starting here, and kind of take a minute to briefly explain Cannabis Business Experts and your thoughts of what the two of us and a few other people working together could bring to the table for people. And then let's get back to the coronavirus. But first, I want to hear what you have to say about Cannabis Business Experts.
Yeah, absolutely, Vijay. And thank you. I'm excited about being a part of this collaboration with you and with Amanda and David. And kind of background for our listeners and viewers is the four of us all work together during the high growth time at Charlotte's Web. And I was the founding CMO, and Vijay was the founding operations manager, really that brought quality and GMP focus into the equation. Amanda was our designer, and David was involved on the genetics and the growing operations. It was really just an amazing time for all of us coming together, growing the company from, I think it was around 4 million to 40 million during the time that we all overlapped. So it was really a critical growth phase for Charlotte's Web, and really proud that we've all stayed close and are now putting this venture together to kind of help share our knowledge with growing cannabis brands.
I think that's a great point. The four of us worked hand in hand during that high growth time period at CW, and we really were kind of the first in the industry to break through in a lot of things: creative marketing, GMP regulations, adhering to dietary supplement, CFR 21 CFR Part 111, really breaking through and having companies who had not worked with the hemp industry work in the hemp industry for the first time. And we had to convince them to take part in that risk at the time, which has turned into some reward for some people, and hopefully that reward continues to happen. But really being able to be at the forefront of the industry is, I think, what this collaboration brings to the table for all of us. So thank you so much for your partnership, Ashley. And I know we'll be happy to get David and Amanda on future podcasts on future topics, and their excellent expertise will be very useful for many companies in the future. But let's get back to the coronavirus for a minute here.
Yeah.
What other things do you think immediately are going to be impacted? For example, what do you think could be the impact on supply chain coming over from China with the current situation?
Well, I think it's going to be impacted in a couple different ways. All the packaging, bottles, boxes, labels, a lot of that comes directly from China. So that's going to be increased time, increased expense, increased anxiety for the players out there. It's just going to be a situation that hopefully in a more macro sense will begin to move more manufacturing back to the United States. And we can talk more about that as we go on. But in terms of the impact on supply chain for the CBD products, I think you're dealing with more anxiety, more time, more expense. Probably going to have higher prices as well. I know a lot of the MCT oils that are used in the industry for mixing as carrier oil with CBD. A lot of that comes from China, and other ingredients. Other ingredients like turmeric and omegas and those types of things are usually imported as well. So I think there could be price pressure on the negative side or positive side for consumers.
Okay, I think that's a great point, Ashley. What do you think then, moving into the overall effect on U.S. manufacturers, what do you think the impact for U.S. manufacturers is going to be right away?
Well, I think it's going to be, like I said earlier, referred to, there's going to be hopefully a demand for more local sourcing. That's obviously good for U.S. jobs, any companies that are selling boxes and bottles and labels. And I know there's lots of those emerging. I know in some of my startup experiences, I've found some really high quality U.S. sources. And maybe this will be the situation where everybody won't just choose price, and they'll choose more of the reliability of the U.S. manufacturing. And again, that's going to go all the way down into the supplemental ingredients too. The MCT, turmeric, ashwagandha, melatonin, all of that stuff that's more locally produced will be, I think, in more premium demand.
I think that's a great point. I think another point that, you've kind of touched on is that manufacturing is going to have some constraints, both back in China, which we were talking about earlier in the supply chain considerations, and domestically here. I think that as there's, shutdowns of large plants, which I've heard of happening in China due to not wanting to congregate large groups of people together, as well as here in the U.S., there will be, you're obviously going to have some percentage of the labor force that's going to be out sick at some point, as well as just perhaps a shift. I know definitely in China, I've heard rumors of this, to more meaningful manufacturing. For example, manufacturing medical masks instead of toys, or for packaging for CBD components. And so what do you think about the overall labor impact beyond what I've just described? Do you think that we're going to be able to recover quickly enough to get ample labor supply ready, both for manufacturing and then maybe leading into this year's harvest or this year's planting, really?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's so much, trickle down in the economics of the industry, right? That it's hitting people in lots of different ways. My brother-in-law's or my sister-in-law's just let me know that she's being temporarily laid off from her job because they don't really have a need for her. They're promising to hire her back. So there's going to be, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot more of that happening, which is going to increase the labor force. And then depending upon, how fast this virus scare passes, then will that labor force be reallocated potentially into the cannabis industry? It could work out in a very nice way. As you know, I know it was a rough year for U.S. growers because they, for various reasons, it's a whole nother topic of another podcast. But it's been a tough year. I think most people, our listeners, probably understand that. But this could be a situation that's giving us some hope again for U.S. grown material, and a focus on that. And with the labor force being totally disrupted in lots of different ways, could bring a lot of people that maybe had not been into the cannabis workforce or hadn't considered it. Maybe they will be considering it now.
Well, you just brought up another point that made me think of another point along with that. Kind of a tangent to this, with perhaps impact on supplies coming from China being delayed. Do you think there'll be an increase of demand on, for example, the fiber industry from hemp and further development in that area for use of byproducts of the hemp plant to develop, for example, biofuel to, lessen the impact of oil, or, shiv from the stalks for fiber in hempcrete to replace Chinese steel, something like that?
It's an interesting question. There's lots at play there. I know that China has been the largest importer of Canadian fiber hemp for some time. With the downshifting in Chinese production, that would assume then that there's more hemp fiber than available in the Canadian market for redeployment into the U.S. markets if the U.S. markets wanted to embrace hemp fiber innovation. Meanwhile, that would serve as a really interesting model for hemp growers during the 2020 season who may be unaware of the benefits of growing hemp fiber. They may have been burned by growing hemp CBD, either because it didn't, the genetics were poor, it turned hot on them, or or there just wasn't a market for it because everybody wanted the Chinese version because it was cheaper. All those sorts of things kind of happened. But with regards to this year and fiber, I think that that it's really, really an interesting time, because most of all of the component parts or plastics that would potentially be replaced with a hemp-based fiber, it's all made in China today. I say it's all, but let's say 80 to 90% of it is made in China, and there's a seamless process that now has been disrupted by this flow. And there's a chance, anytime there's a disruption, there's a chance for a new process to take hold.
I think that's a great opportunity, indeed. Okay, moving kind of more to the financial impact on U.S. manufacturers and growers. The markets have been down substantially day after day. I think there was a little bit of a rally this morning, but that has kind of tapered off here as the day has gone on. What that really means is that, there's been a huge sell-off. People have been pulling their money out of the market in general, obviously, but especially I've been noticing a large sell-off in the cannabis sector. Canadian traded companies, publicly traded companies here that may have U.S. operations.
Yeah, our company has dropped quite a bit, unfortunately.
It's interesting to see this dynamic, and I guess my question to you is, what do you think the future impact will be? Do you think, given that this is going to impact people's pocketbooks at home, talking perhaps CBD is a luxury, and you can speak to that a little bit more. And then really kind of wrapping up with, will investors have the security to believe that they can reinvest in the hemp market, and they're not going to have a reinvest of the crash that we've seen, at the end of last year into this year, even before the coronavirus? So that's kind of a three-layer question for you, but if you could kind of talk about that, those layers a little bit.
Yeah, well, let's start with the investor layer first. It was a bad time for cannabis investments already, and then this has been you know, obviously there's things that bigger play here than the fate of the cannabis industry, right? We realize that, but you know, this is a cannabis focused conversation. So in regards to cannabis, this has been really pretty devastating for us and in the industry in terms of just drying up the money even further. It's interesting though, because where's the money going? It's everything's going out of everything, right? It's not being reallocated into anything at this point. So there's going to be a lot of cash available after this crisis, and it'll be interesting to see maybe where does that go. You know, I'm an optimist, so at the end of the day, there's realities happening, but in terms of, you know, optimism for the industry and going forward, I don't think there's any other way than you know, following the light. I mean, it's an amazingly beneficial plant from so many ways, whether it's medicinal or industrial. So, you know, I think that there's short term, there's going to be investment issues, but out of that could regrow an amazingly new opportunity. And it's kind of the same thing with the consumer impact. You know, people are going to have less money to spend right now because many are losing their jobs. You know, people don't, you know, I gave the example earlier within my family, but there's, you know, think of the people, the vendors, the parking attendants, the hotel operators, restaurant operators that are in, you know, that are now around sporting events, and all that's been canceled. So, you know, there's going to be a short-term major economic impact, and CBD is a luxury for many people. And that can't help but have a negative impact on the industry. You know, it's going to, you know, maybe even rapidly accelerate in the short term some of this negative trend that we've seen. However, you know, there is opportunity for CBD brands. There's, you know, right now there's a lot of fear in the market, and just not in the market, I'm sorry, fear in the world. And that increases anxiety, that increases sleeplessness. Obviously those are some things that, you know, people use CBD to try to get support for.
I think that's a great point, you know, and I personally use CBD for those items as well too. And feeling stressed out or anxiety, you know, I personally find that, not making any kind of medical claims, of course, but anecdotally, you know, I've been finding some success with that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point there, Vijay, about medical claims, because, you know, that's a, you know, there's the realities that people use CBD for these symptoms, but they, you know, companies are not allowed to make those claims directly. And, you know, it's a danger during this time where people are going to be trying to profiteer off of the fear. You know, that there's going to be companies out there making claims, and people need to understand and you know, trust that the best brands out there are the ones that are a little bit confusing to them in terms of what they have and what they include on the label, because the rules are not followed by everybody equally. And so I think that that's another thing that we should look at during this time, is making sure that there's as an industry and people that are involved, we're helping to self-police and making sure that people are following the rules when it comes to claims and not making them.
And I think that's a really good point. You know, we just saw a recent round of FDA warning letters to a number of companies who were making some very egregious claims, including, you know, it can cure cancer, things along those lines. So, you know, from a scientific standpoint, I can't say without, you know, a doubt that there's no chance it could help against coronavirus, but I definitely can say that, you know, I personally would not be relying on CBD as a protection for the coronavirus. Having a degree in microbiology, I think that, you know, definitely using CBD to promote my general wellness and health, getting a better night's sleep is probably more of a protection against the coronavirus than taking CBD into my system per se. And I think that's kind of where, you know, you have to be cautious, because I think there are going to be people just looking to make a buck, preying off people's fear, who are going to be saying things and making claims for efficacy against this virus, which, you know, from a scientific standpoint, I could not see how that vector would work. But
yeah. And I saw a product today that somebody was selling a CBD infused hand gel, right? So again, you know, what is the additional value that the CBD is bringing to the equation with the 90% alcohol hand gel, right? I mean, I'm struggling with that. Why would I want to pay more to have the CBD infused into my hand gel? And it also just, to me, it those types of products seem that, again, they're running toward the profit, the immediate kind of fear, and unless there's a real strong value proposition, I'm open to that. If there is one, if there's a way to prove that it's helping against that virus additionally beyond the alcohol, then I'm all in. But I'm just, those types of products without that support seem to do more harm for the industry than anything, in my opinion. I don't know. What do you think about that, Vijay? I mean,
I agree. And, in a way, that's almost a whole other podcast topic in and of itself is, but I think that's exactly what we're seeing, just to take a quick minute on that, is we're seeing a lot of products out there that are not efficacious, that don't actually contain CBD, that aren't formulated correctly, that don't have the shelf life that they're actually stating on there, that aren't, that are making claims for conditions such as pain, chronic pain, that they don't have any business making. And unfortunately, that hurts the industry overall, because the people who are trying to do it right aren't, as you mentioned before, are following the rules and are not making those claims, even though they may see some anecdotal results from their customers and have reviews writing in. They can't post those reviews. And so the people who are making noise with all these claims really become what CBD gets known for. And that's really why I think there's, and this is, like I said, a whole another podcast topic, but there's such a need for the FDA to step in right now and really provide a regulatory framework for these products. I mean, it's gone too far down the road for them to try and seize everybody's CBD or something along those lines. And so I think really the most realistic approach for the FDA is really going to have to step in and create some kind of regulatory framework for dietary supplement / OTC, because what we don't want, exactly what we just mentioned earlier in this podcast, a situation because there's not regulations, people not following the proper GMPs, and then introducing something like a coronavirus into a mass retailed product that's being spread out to, the whole country, possibly even internationally, without the proper GMPs. So I think the threshold for really serious effects is there until the FDA can really create some kind of regulatory framework that we can all abide by.
Well, I think that's good advice. And I think ultimately that's what Cannabis Business Experts is here to try to help support, right? That's why we put this team together, to try to help people take advantage of some of the starts and stops that we've all experienced in our time together and growing what's still the largest cannabis brand in the world.
Okay, Ashley, I think that's a great set of points for today's conversation. I really appreciate you helping me get the message out today. I think we'll have a lot to look forward for many more of these in the future, and we'll have a number of guests that we'll be bringing on with additional topics. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ashley. Hope everybody has a great Friday the 13th. Thanks.
Take care.